Hello, Georgia Jagir here, independent Stampin' Up! Demonstrator. My blog is stampingeorgia.com, and I'm excited about the card I'm going to share with you today. I was inspired by one that I received in a card swap from fellow demonstrator Susan Kempfield, and I just took her idea, and of course that's what we do. We take an idea and make it our own, whether it's one we see on Pinterest, or we get in a swap, or we've seen it on Facebook, wherever. Well, this is the card that I made, and one of the things that I love about it is it uses the Painted Harvest stamp set, which is by far my favorite stamp set in the holiday catalog. And another thing that I have used is the Layered Leaves Dynamic Textured Impressions folder, which is a favorite out of the 2017 annual catalog. And you'll notice that the background looks a little bit different. I'm going to share some tips on how you can use those embossing folders that you already have to get another look, and then also some tips on using the Painted Harvest stamp set. So come on, let's get started. So here's a closer look at these cards, and you can see they didn't turn out exactly the same. I've done the background here with Sahara Sand ink on Sahara Sand cardstock. One's a happy birthday and one's a sympathy. And I have to tell you, the dots that are added on that one are covering up little teeny marks that I made with my fingernail having ink on it. So that little dot stamps that's in the Painted Harvest stamp set is quite useful. And I'm going to share, this is the stamp set, Painted Harvest. It's so pretty. So one of the first things I'm going to share with you is some stamping tips using this stamp set. This is the first step that I stamp, and it's not going to look like anything special when you first stamp it. In fact, it's meant to be shaded and to look uneven. And as you add each step, your image gets prettier and prettier. So let's just show you. So I always stamp with, when I'm using the photopolymer stamps, I always use Stampin' Pierce mat. And I also use it when I stamp with any kind of stamp, just because I do a better job. I don't push as hard because I don't have to. The stamp mat does a lot of the work for me. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've placed my piece of cardstock, which is 2.5 by 3 1/4, onto the corner because I'm going to stamp off the edges and I don't want to get ink on my Stampin' Pierce mat. So I stamped the first one. I don't have to push hard, just make sure the whole image has touched the paper. And now you can see it's uneven. Then I'm going to take the second step, which has a little more detail. And really all I'm going to do is look through the center to stamp that one. It's not meant to matchy-matchy. And just make sure the whole stamp touches. And now you can see the pretty detail that I've added to that. The next thing I'm going to do, I have to close ink pads as I go because I will inevitably put my stamp in the wrong color if I don't. Next thing I'm going to do is stamp the center, and I look through that opening. You notice I didn't do a very good job. What's cool about this one is you can always stamp it a second time and it'll fill in. It won't hurt a thing. There's the dots that I used. I'm going to just add those into the center of my flower. I'm going to hold that up closer so you can see it. And then the last thing I'm going to add to this image are my leaves. I'm going to use Pear Pizzazz for that. And I'm using a Post-it note. This is just a little tip for stamping your leaves so they don't look like they're flying in outer space. I stamp the flatter stamp with less detail first, and then I will bring in the detail one. And when I'm stamping that, what I'm looking to match is stems. And if it doesn't stamp perfectly, and you can see I didn't, it really doesn't matter. It still looks good. Remove the Post-it, and there you have it. And then the last thing I'm going to do, and because I love that I can change out the greeting that I use on it, I use more birthdays, but oftentimes you need a sympathy on hand, so this is also makes a great sympathy card. And I use the soft suede ink over the top of that. And so now the next step that I'm going to show you is how do you get that extra color and change up the look of your embossing folder. So I'm starting with a piece of Sahara Sand cardstock that is 4 by 5 1/4. And then I'm going to use my Layered Leaves Dynamic Textured Impressions folder. And it's dynamic because there are different depths of impressions in it. And what I'm going to do is take my Sahara Sand ink pad, and I'm going to use a sponge roller. And with this, I don't want to put a lot of pressure. What is most effective is you can always go back and add more color, and I'm using a light color, so it's not going to show a lot. But if I push hard, then I end up putting ink down into the impression, and that's not my goal. I want to keep it mostly on the flat part of this design. So, and if it's uneven, that's perfect because it just adds to the look. So then I put that in there. Bring in my Big Shot. When you're using the dynamic textured, you're going to use your Big Shot platform, and you use it on the side that shows the picture for embossing, but you only use one impressions or cutting plate, and you're going to lay that directly onto your platform. And I like to put my folders in hinge first because it saves on the pressure that gets exerted on those little plastic hinges every time you use it. So I believe you extend the life of your embossing folders when you do that. So now this is when the fun happens. You remove that and look at how pretty that looks. So I have some leaves that have a little bit of brown on them because they're not quite as deep as some of the others. It really makes that design pop. And then I tied a piece of linen thread around before adhering it to my card, and I also stamped on an insert just down in a corner. I like to leave the insert on my cards blank. That way I have room to write what I need to write depending on what kind of card it is. And then this is just added with dimensionals to the front of my card. I use soft suede as my card base, same as for my layering. And one of the things that you'll want to know is how do you clean that? How do you get the textured folders clean? You can either run it under the faucet to remove that ink and just dry it with paper towel, or you can take it and use a wipe or something like that if a sink isn't handy while you're doing this. I like to have paper towel handy just so I don't leave moisture in there while I'm doing it. So that's really all I have to share with you today. What a fun tip, and I hope that you will give this fun idea a try.